Right, so Jonathan Eig's King, A Life. Is it worth your time? That's what we're looking at,
Mhm.
right, in this deep dive. I mean, this book's got a lot of people talking, even won a Pulitzer.
Yeah, it's gotten some serious attention.
So I guess it makes sense, though, right? I mean, he's not new to this whole biography thing.
Oh, absolutely not. He's a seasoned biographer for sure. And his work on, like, Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali, those were phenomenal, those biographies.
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
So if those resonated with you, if you enjoyed those, chances are you'll really dig into this one.
All right, so that's good to know. It gives us some context, at least. But, okay, what's really different about Eig's take on King? We've all heard that I have a dream speech
Yeah.
a million times.
Right, exactly. But the thing is, Eig, he really gets into King's complexities as a person. Like, he doesn't shy away from that. He uses a lot of new research, a lot of it's recently available, including stuff from declassified FBI files, to sort of paint a more complete picture, and sometimes a more challenging one.
Wait, FBI files? And that sounds kind of intense. What are we talking about here?
Well, for example, Eig reveals that the FBI actually tried to use King's infidelity in his marriage to discredit him. They went as far as sending him this anonymous letter, basically urging him to commit suicide.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
It shows you how far they were willing to go to silence him.
It really does. I mean, it makes you wonder how he even functioned under that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
So does I go into much detail about King's early life? Like what shaped him? What led him to become such a monumental figure?
Absolutely. Ike takes us way back to King's childhood. Growing up in the segregated South, he even explores the social gospel movement. That's a movement that essentially emphasizes like social justice as part of Christian faith, which, deeply influenced King's father, a prominent minister, and of course, eventually that kind of shaped King's own worldview.
Huh. So it wasn't a direct line like, son of a preacher becomes a preacher.
Right, exactly.
There's other things influencing him. That's interesting.
Yeah, and Eig doesn't just, tell us about these influences. He shows us. He uses vivid anecdotes. There's this one, a really powerful story about a young king. He was actually close friends with a white boy until segregation forced them apart.
Oh, wow.
The white boy's parents literally told him he couldn't be friends with King anymore because of his skin color.
Wow.
Just like that.
That must have been, I mean, you could see how an experience like that could shape someone's entire outlook on life.
Absolutely.
It really shows the impact, the personal impact of segregation.
Yeah, that personal impact, it's a thread that runs throughout the entire biography. Eig really brings us inside King's world.
Okay, so we get the context of his early life. But what about the Black church? I mean, obviously he was central to King's life, but how does Eig portray its significance to the whole movement?
Well, Eig emphasizes that the church wasn't just like a backdrop. It was a powerhouse. It provided a safe space, like a training ground for activists, and a source of strength for the entire Black community. It was like the movement's backbone.
So it wasn't just like Sunday sermons.
Yeah.
It was organizing.
Exactly.
Strategizing.
Precisely. And, Eig shows how King's upbringing in the church with his father as a leader, deeply informed his own approach to leadership.
Okay. So we've got the foundation. But what about the major campaigns and the events? I mean, we all know the basics. Does he bring anything new to the table?
Oh, he really does. Remember those FBI files?
Oh, yeah.
He uses them to reveal a lot of new details, a lot of nuance, even on events that are pretty well known.
Really?
Yeah, like take the Montgomery bus boycott. I mean, we all know about Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, right? That iconic image. But Eig, he reveals the strategic thinking behind that. It wasn't like a spontaneous thing.
Yeah.
It was carefully orchestrated by King and other leaders like E.D. Nixon. They saw it as an opportunity to spark a larger movement.
Huh. It's like we're getting a behind-the-scenes look.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes you realize that these weren't just random events. They were carefully planned out.
Exactly.
So how does Eig handle King's relationships with other civil rights leaders? Like, were they all on the same page, or were there conflicts?
Oh, there were definitely conflicts. The movement, it wasn't a monolith. There were tensions, disagreements, especially between King and some of the more militant leaders, like Malcolm X, for example, during those Selma to Montgomery marches. Malcolm X, he publicly criticized King's nonviolent approach. He argued that Black people should arm themselves in self-defense.
Wow. I mean, that must have created some serious friction.
It did. And Eig doesn't shy away from those divisions.
No, you're right. He doesn't. It's interesting. You're kind of painting King less as a saint, more like a political strategist. Is that fair?
I think so, yeah. And Eig doesn't shy away from King's flaws either. He addresses the plagiarism in some of King's academic work and his struggles with infidelity.
Hmm. Okay, I gotta be honest. I'm a little skeptical about this whole warts and all approach. Doesn't that take away from his accomplishments? Yeah, I mean, doesn't it undermine his moral authority?
That's a valid concern. It's something a lot of readers grapple with. But I think Eig handles it carefully. He doesn't sensationalize King's shortcomings. He presents them as part of a larger, a more human portrait. It's not about diminishing his legacy. It's about understanding him in all his complexity.
I see what you're saying. It's about recognizing that even our heroes, they're human.
Right.
They make mistakes, they have flaws, weaknesses, and maybe that makes their achievements even more impressive.
Yeah, I think so. And that's one of the strengths of this book, really. Eig doesn't avoid those difficult parts of King's life, but he also doesn't let them overshadow, his contributions to the fight for social justice.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. King's early life, the church, the major campaigns, his relationships with other leaders, even his personal struggles. But how does this biography compare to other major works on King, like Taylor Branch's 3-volume biography? Is Eig offering something new? Or is he just kind of, retreading familiar ground?
That's a great question. Branch's work, it's definitely incredibly comprehensive, very detailed, a classic, for good reason. But where Eig really shines is in his portrait of King the Man. He makes it more intimate, more accessible. He's not trying to tell the entire story of the civil rights movement.
Right, right.
His focus is on King himself, his inner life, how he evolved as a leader, his humanity.
So if I want, the broader historical context, I should go with Branch.
Yeah, probably.
But if I want to really understand King on a deeper level, I should go with Eig.
I think that's a good way to put it, yeah. He offers a fresh perspective on King, one that's both insightful and engaging.
All right, you've definitely got me leaning towards giving this book a try. But before we get into whether it's worth the read, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll unpack some of those, specific revelations and key takeaways that make King life stand out.
Okay, so we've talked about Eig's kind of fresh perspective on King, focusing on his humanity and, his internal struggles. What are some of the key takeaways for you? What makes this book stand out?
Well, one of the most fascinating things for me is how Eig portrays King's intellectual development. Like, he doesn't just show up, as this fully formed leader. We see his ideas taking shape. We see how he's influenced by thinkers like Gandhi, Thoreau, even Reinhold Niebuhr. Eig shows us King wrestling with some pretty complex theological and philosophical concepts, really grappling with that question of how you reconcile faith with the fight for justice. I've always wondered about that, how he developed that philosophy of nonviolence. Was it something he always believed in? Or was it something he arrived at, I don't know, through a process of exploration?
Yeah, Eig actually reveals that King's commitment to nonviolence, it was definitely a journey. It wasn't just like an instant thing for him. He initially believed in self-defense. He even applied for a gun permit when he was a young man. But it was through his study of Gandhi and his, growing understanding of Christian love that he came to really embrace nonviolence. He saw it as this powerful weapon against oppression.
That's a side of him I hadn't really considered. And it makes that commitment, that unwavering commitment, even more remarkable when you realize it wasn't just instinct.
Exactly. And Eig doesn't shy away from the challenges that King faced in maintaining that commitment, He shows how some within the movement, people like Stokely Carmichael, they started advocating for Black power. They started advocating for armed self-defense, which, created tension and debate within the movement itself.
Yeah, I bet. That must have been incredibly difficult for King, right? To navigate those divisions internally while also dealing with all the external opposition from segregationists and the FBI.
It was a constant balancing act. Eig highlights this one pivotal moment during those Selma to Montgomery marches. There was intense pressure on King to abandon nonviolence after this white protester was killed.
Oh, wow.
But he ultimately chose to continue the march, reaffirming his commitment to peaceful resistance, even in the face of violence.
I mean, it speaks volumes, that decision, about his courage. But it also shows just how much pressure he was under
Right.
from all sides. And you mentioned the FBI surveillance earlier. What kind of tactics did they use? How did all that affect King personally?
Well, I mean, beyond just the wiretaps and the informants, they really went all out with this smear campaign, leaking information about King's personal life to the press, trying to paint him as a communist sympathizer. They even sent him that anonymous letter that I mentioned before, the one urging him to commit suicide to avoid public humiliation.
It's hard to imagine dealing with that kind of psychological warfare. Did he ever express doubts, fears? I mean, about the risks he was taking?
He does reveal that, King confided in some of his close friends, his advisors. He talked about the emotional burden. He experienced depression, anxiety, the constant threat of violence. But what's striking is that he never let that fear, paralyze him. He kept speaking out, kept organizing, kept leading, even when his life was on the line.
That takes an incredible amount of strength. I mean, where did he find that?
Eig suggests that King drew a lot of his strength from his faith, from his family, the support of the Black community. He also found inspiration in the words and examples of those who had fought for justice before him, like Gandhi, the abolitionists.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, even the most courageous leaders, they're not immune to fear, to doubt. They draw strength from their beliefs, from their communities, from knowing that they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from this biography, from Eek's book. It shows us that leadership isn't about, being fearless or perfect. It's about finding the courage to act when you're afraid, to persevere when you face setbacks, to stick to your principles, even when they're tested.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful message. And it feels really relevant right now. When, so many people are feeling overwhelmed by everything, it's easy to feel like your actions don't matter. But King's story, it reminds us that even when you're facing huge obstacles, that one person's courage, their commitment, it can make a difference.
I agree. I think that's where Eig's focus on King's humanity really, shines. By showing us his vulnerabilities, his struggles, his doubts, Eig makes him more relatable, more human, and ultimately more inspiring.
As we're talking about this, I keep thinking about how relevant King's message is today. Like, we're still grappling with racial and economic injustice, and his words feel as timely as ever.
It's really remarkable how King's calls for equality, for justice, for nonviolent resistance, how they continue to resonate. His insights into prejudice, the power of love, the importance of speaking truth to power, it's all as relevant today as it was during the civil rights movement.
I think you've really made a strong case for King, A Life, as a valuable read, not just for people interested in history, but for anyone looking for guidance, looking for inspiration. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You said that Eid's biography is more intimate and focused compared to, like, Taylor Branch's work. Does Eig leave out any important details or context that might leave readers wanting more?
Well, while it's true that he really focuses on King himself, he doesn't completely ignore historical context. He gives enough background on the major events and people in the civil rights movement, so readers get a good understanding of the landscape. But if you're looking for a really deep dive into the specifics of certain campaigns or, the broader political and social forces at play, then Branch's work is probably still the best option.
So Eig is a good portrait of King, and Branch is a good, more in-depth look at the movement itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, that helps. So ultimately, which one's better? It just depends on what you're looking for.
Exactly. And that's, that's the great thing about having different perspectives, on such an important figure and such a pivotal moment in history. Each book offers its own insights and helps us to, to understand King's legacy in a richer way.
So for those of us who are ready to, to really delve deeper into King's life and legacy, would you say that Eig's King, A Life, is a worthy investment? Is it worth our time?
Absolutely, it is. Eig's King, A Life, it offers a really compelling portrait of King, one that, goes beyond those simple narratives that we often hear. It's really a deep dive into his humanity, his struggles, and that unwavering commitment to justice. I think anyone who reads this book will come away with, with a much deeper understanding of the complexities of both, the man himself and the movement that he led.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong endorsement.
Yeah.
And you've definitely piqued my interest. I bet a lot of our listeners feel the same way. But before we go, I want to circle back to something you mentioned before about the relevance of King's message today. What parts of his philosophy or his approach to activism do you think are most applicable to the challenges that we're facing now?
Hmm. One of the key takeaways for me is King's his emphasis on how interconnected all these different forms of injustice are. Like he didn't just focus on racial equality. He saw the fight for civil rights as, as part of a larger struggle for economic justice,
Right.
for peace, for human dignity, for all people. He recognized that these systems of oppression, they're all connected, and that to really achieve liberation, it requires a holistic approach.
Yeah, that's a really powerful insight, and it really connects with a lot of the conversations we're having today, about intersectionality,
Mm.
about, the need to address all these systemic inequalities. It's a good reminder that we can't just focus on one issue at a time, in isolation. We have to see the bigger picture and work towards a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Exactly, yeah. And another part of King's philosophy that feels, incredibly relevant is his belief in the power of nonviolent resistance. In a world where we're seeing so much violence and division, King's message of love, compassion, and peaceful protest, it offers like this powerful antidote.
It's true. It's so easy to get overwhelmed by all the negativity, and the polarization. It can be tempting to just give in to cynicism or even despair. But King's example shows us that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to choose hope over hate, to choose love over fear, and to choose nonviolence over aggression. It's not an easy path, but it's a path that ultimately I think leads to a more just and humane world.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that really sums up the enduring legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. He wasn't just the leader of a movement; he was a beacon of hope, a voice of conscience, and a champion for the beloved community. And his words, his actions, they continue to inspire us to create a world where justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. Eig's King, A Life. It sounds like essential reading for anyone who wants to understand this complex and inspiring figure. It reminds us that our heroes, they're human, and that the fight for justice, it's ongoing, and that all of us, we have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. So to our listeners, we encourage you to pick up this book, to explore it, discover the power and the relevance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s message. And until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning, and keep striving to make a difference in the world.